welcome to day 2 of the International Rare Disease Showcase. Nice to see plenty of people here nice and early and ready to dive into a session all about drug repurposing. Before we do that, though, it's important just to go through some of the basic housekeeping announcements. So again, just want to make a quick thank you to all the people who sponsored and supported the event that's allowed us to get this moving and so successful. So thank you to each and every one of those sponsors. With that, I will get to sit back and enjoy the session. I'd like to introduce to the stage Anton Usi from Iatris, who's going to introduce a session on navigating medicine's repurposing maze, something that I care quite a lot about. So Anton, welcome.
Thanks so much, Rick. Much appreciated. Good morning, everybody. Hope you enjoyed day 1 and was very successful and intuitive and enlightening for you all. Let's hope to continue the enlightenment path this morning with some speakers from around Europe talking about medicine's repurposing. We'll go straight into it. You're probably here today with some knowledge of repurposing, at least some aspects of it. It's been around a while, but we also know that while, despite having a lot of promise, we're also not sure that it also delivers that promise every time, or even that many times in 100 attempts. So today we'd like to hear from a few different people from their perspectives. What are the challenges and what are the tips? Let's make it interactive. We'd also love to hear from you as the audience member, whether you've had an experience that has been successful or unsuccessful. Share your questions, share your experiences with us, please. So feel free to throw things into the chat. If you have something interesting to say, we'll spotlight you and ask you to chat with us or drop your question into the discussion. Let's keep it interactive, please, folks. We'd love to hear from you. So without any further ado, my name is Anton Usi. I'm from Iatris, which is European collection of research facilities engaged in translational medicine. Drug repurposing is one of the elements of the medicines process that we work with. We have about 115 research institutes in 14 countries in Europe that support academics, companies, research funders to develop new medicines and repurpose medicines. And with me on the panel today, I have several very, very enlightened people who understand a lot about repurposing. So we look forward to hearing from you. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves, gentlemen. Apologies for the poor gender balance. We had Dunja Haubers from ZonMV on the agenda with us, but unfortunately she's fallen victim to COVID and is now recovering. And very kindly, Sako de Visser of the Future Affordable and Sustainable Therapies Program has joined us. Sako, please introduce yourself.
Yes, good morning. My apologies for being male. I'm also COVID positive, but seem to be doing better than my female counterpart. So yeah, my name is Sako de Visser. I'm intended director for a platform in the Netherlands, Dutch funding platform on behalf of Ministries of Economic Affairs and Health, in sort of trying to coordinate and push the public funding schemes in the Netherlands around development of novel therapies. So all the public funding is sort of channeled through FAST initiative.
Super. Thanks very much, Sako. Looking forward to hearing more about that and your experiences as a research funder supporting the repurposing process. I'll hand over now to Imo of the Fraunhofer Institute for Translational Medicine. Please introduce yourself, Imo.
Hello, everybody. My name is Imo Kant. I'm head of research and preclinical, or head of drug discovery and preclinical research at Fraunhofer. Many of you may know Fraunhofer. It's a not-for-profit applied research organization, actually working in many different areas, IT, engineering, and physics, agriculture, but also the biomedical space. And in our institute, we have focused on repurposing programs, not only in the area of rare diseases, but also infectious diseases, lately COVID, in our institute, especially using our repurposing screening library that consists of compounds that are either approved drugs or have been in clinical development for other indications, actually across a broad range of indications. And we try to find ways how to use them or repurpose them, for other, especially orphan indications where they could do well. I joined Fraunhofer coming from Sanofi, where I was head of research in the area of comorbidities and complications of diabetes. So I also bring in some nearly 20 years of industrial drug discovery and development expertise.
I'm outstanding. Welcome today. Thank you so much. We really look forward to hearing your wealth of experience of the challenges of drug development. I'm going to now pass over to Tony. Tony, Scientific Director at IATRIS and a dear colleague. Tony, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Tony Andreu. As Anton said, I am the Scientific Director of IATRIS, and my responsibility here is to coordinate the scientific agenda of the organization. I am an MD by training, and I did my PhD many years ago in the field of rare diseases, in particular, studying mechanisms for the development of some mitochondrial disorders, which has been my main area of scientific expertise over the last 30 years. And it's been a fascinating journey because that gave me the opportunity of interacting with different stakeholders in the field of rare diseases, doing basic science, also working with the patient community, with policymakers, development of experimental models, and also applied clinical research. And I think that repurposing is the perfect example in the field of rare diseases, how we can identify solutions for tackling unmet medical challenges, providing real solutions to the patient community. So very happy to participate in this repurposing journey.
Thank you, Tony. And finally, before we really get kicking into it, last but certainly by no means least, Martin de Court of IATRIS as well, Senior Program Manager and soon to be Program Director of a large initiative in repurposing at IATRIS. Please go ahead, Martin.
Nice to meet you all. Martin de Court. I'm a chemist by training, a PhD in Leiden, so also based in the Netherlands, but fully European and fully in a gender-balanced team working our way through Europe. I think I'm like Imo. I'm experienced in the pharma, having the role of a multidisciplinary team lead, appreciating the complexities of medicines development. And repurposing, I think, has its own challenges, which we're happy to work on together. So our role within IATRIS and my role has been also to kind of be a beacon in the infrastructure landscape in translational medicine, to use a nice word. So happy to join the discussion.
Thanks very much, Martin. Right, and of course, you, the audience, I'm very grateful to Paul and Mary for leading the charge on the audience sharing their cameras. Thanks a lot, that's great. Please do feel free. Let's make this nice and informal. We promise not to laugh at your hairstyles. You should have seen mine during the lockdown. And then we're gonna make it very interactive. So we do wanna hear from people as well from the audience. Now, kicking into the content, drug repurposing, so much promise. It's been around a while. There have been successes, and gives us lots of opportunity to be optimistic about it. But there's also the realities, and I think we at IATRIS certainly, and I'm sure that other people here in the audience know the realities. Is it quite different from that idea that we can quickly and effectively repurpose medicine? So maybe we could start with Imo. What's your experience in the really at the wheelhouse of drug development? Where is the field right now, and how does the promise meet the reality?
I think that, I mean, it depends, it depends on specific indications and programs that are being run. There are, as you said, there are some successes lately in the area of drug repurposing. For example, also in infectious diseases, some quite interesting success stories. But there are also some barriers, and I think we will talk about these barriers in more detail, during this discussion that we, need to address in order to improve the chances of success for repurposing approaches. I think from the technical point of view, finding interesting molecules for repurposing approaches, that's pretty much, I would say, on track, and the opportunities there are quite sophisticated. I would say the challenges come at the later stages when we talk about regulatory requirements, for example, business models for repurposed drugs, and also how to get engaged, with perhaps owners of these molecules, other companies, how get them interested in repurposing approaches in the area of rare diseases. So just as a nutshell, I would summarize the current situation as that.
Very clear. Thank you. So technically speaking, we can do it, and then there are challenges further downstream that we see. Very clear message. Thanks a lot. We'll go into those details a bit later. You already mentioned 3 areas that I'm sure each has a world of content itself. We'll go into that in a little bit later. Sarko, so from your life in the research process and also as a research funder at ZonMV, you've been engaged in supporting the process. What's your take on the state of the art?
Yeah, well, I very much agree with the previous statements that the pipeline is, and if you call it a global pipeline of repurposed candidates, seems to be doing quite well. It's just really further down the road where development and the royal route of the the normal paradigm for drug development, so the registration, reimbursement area, and the clinical trials. That's where the trouble starts. It doesn't really fit in the traditional drug development paradigm in many ways. So we've started funding pretty much late stage clinical work, predominantly for academia. Maybe as long as 10 years ago, maybe, for repurposing to stimulate the visibility and the promise of repurposing drugs for novel indications, without actually knowing, or we knew at the time that it would cause more trouble because the paradigm doesn't really fit. So we don't know how to bring it forward in a traditional way, in the sense that regulators need some adaptation, academics need to step up and partner up with companies, but companies themselves are not your particular larger pharmaceutical companies. So there's all sorts of areas where repurposing doesn't fit the normal paradigm. So we've changed actually during the course of these years of funding from the classic let the academics take it one step further approach to join in discussions with EMA. We're involved in the pipeline from the European Commission, or the pilot with the European Commission and EMA on guiding a repurposed drug through the regulatory maze. And for our funding, we've actually incorporated our local ethics committee or medicinal evaluation boards, MEB, to give scientific advice pre-granting, so to trying to bring the worlds of regulation and academic and public-private partnerships further. So lots of challenges and hardly any really successes. There's one officially registered drug in the Netherlands now that's fully repurposed for IBD. And that has taken forever and lots of struggles. And I think we really need to learn from those really late stage things to understand how we should fund it in an early stage.
Yeah, thank you. So that 10 years of experience, it's showing that the reality is quite challenging, and it's things that come later that may have been unexpected that are the bottlenecks in your opinion. We'll go into more detail in that in just a moment. I'm going to push that question through to Tony. Tony, from your perspective, having been in the lab doing work on rare diseases and having also been a policymaker in Spain and elsewhere, what do you see as the main challenges? Anything additional to what you've heard now?
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, I think repurposing represents the interaction of 3 pillars, which is science itself, the understanding the biology of processes, also the engineer of the process of this long translational journey that repurposing represents, and also the engagement with the different stakeholders. I think that from the scientific perspective, in a development of a scientific model in the Western world in particular, where science tend to silo in its capacities in very narrow spaces, repurposing represents a challenge because pushes the scientific community to break these boundaries, to be part of a long journey where they have to interact with other stakeholders. They have to understand the process because, as you guys mentioned, downstream challenges, regulatory interaction with other people that are key for developing an appropriate business model. That's something that from the scientific community, we do not have the right expertise. Sometimes we don't even understand the language. So the repurposing process is a perfect scenario for engaging science with other stakeholders that participate in this process, and in particular with one group of stakeholders, which are the patient community, and in particular in the field of rare diseases. Very often, science develop in a very close, let's say, a space where it was very difficult to interact and establish a dialogue, in particular with the patient community and with the citizens in general. So repurposing examples give us a perfect ground test for creating this active flow of interaction and making sure that this process moves forward efficiently. Rare diseases, repurposing in rare diseases in particular, represents also a big opportunity for the rest of the biomedical sciences, because what we have seen in the last few years is that successful examples of repurposed drugs in rare diseases gave us a better understanding of the biology of processes that can be also used for the development of novel molecules, identifying novel targets for tackling big challenges in the field of biomedical research. So this is, of course, it's a complex journey. We need to change our culture a little bit. Science is just part of the process, but there is an enormous possibility for development. And I think the key point will be to establish a framework with all these actors that interact and collaborate in the development of the repurposing process, can work together on the development of examples of success that will be the proof of concept to demonstrate that repurposing is one way for the progress of biomedical research.
Super. Thank you, Tony. Very clear, very comprehensive coverage. The word interdisciplinarity comes to mind. I think already 3 of the 4 statements thus far have really implied interdisciplinarity, and cross-sectoral collaboration seem to be a major issue here. Martin, maybe from your experience at IATRIS, where we support these cross-sectoral projects, how would you advise an academic or patient advocacy group trying to embark on this route? How would you say that to bring people together in a way that's going to help understand the future challenges?
Well, first of all, I think a general comment on the current state of drug repurposing. I think it is by no means a smooth and clear process. And in addition to what Sako said, maybe focusing a little bit more earlier on the research domain, where indeed the emphasis should be on multidisciplinary aspects. I think an important driver is also there that big data tools and the awareness of reproducibility crisis, etc., are clearly having a potential. The current numbers actually show that the development time can be 50% of new drug development, but it can also take as long, and as much funding. An advice that I would give on the basis of experiences with where multiple actors come together, I always have to think about the project champion. So there is always a central person, whether it's a patient representative with a kind of a market pool or a need, or a technology push from an academic researcher, that are able to break the boundaries. So know who is the project champion and team up with them, with the ultimate aim to, I think, ensure also that the regulatory planning is considered as soon as possible, especially for drug repurposing, where one might think, well, it's an easy way forward because everything has been done. But if you think about having a patent or not, is it a shelf compound or not? A lot of work is still ahead, and planning with the end goal in mind, considering early together with a project champion, which are the first key steps towards the major, let's say, investment of resources and choices. That would be my first advice. identify the project champion.
Super clear, thank you. So help ensure that the project also has the pull from the actual community that really needs it and help drive it forward. That's that patient-centric approach. Like it very much. Maybe we can sort of dive into a little bit of detail of those showstoppers that we hear, some of those challenges. So the first one that came up from IMO was also the regulatory challenges. Now, the regulatory perspective. Now, these are small molecule drugs, well-known regulatory pathways theoretically. So why does it become a challenge then in repurposing? Imo, maybe you could give us your input on that. Is this a lack of awareness, or is it a lack of an actual route that is understood by anybody and everybody?
I think it can be both. Again, it is specific for the drug molecule and the indication. I mean, repurposing actually has the beauty that a lot is already known about the molecule. So once you find that it may work in a certain rare disease, for example, you also know a lot about these compounds in terms of toxicity. You know how it works in people, how efficacious it is, what potential safety issues may be. And this in principle makes the regulatory process easier rather than more complicated. However, a drug that may be safe in adults with hypertension may not be necessarily or have the same profile in children with a rare disease. You have to consider the differences in the population, in the how the patients look like, what additional issues, problems they may have, and this is again very much specific to this group of patients and to this disease. And this makes it difficult to define, generic guidelines of how to, from a regulatory perspective, of what has to be demonstrated for this drug to be approved for the treatment of such a disease. I would say that's probably one point that complicates the regulatory process for drug repurposing in this area.
So it's really the specificities of every single case, not only its context itself, but then the status of the drug and whether you can access the data and all these things. And it makes it complicated.
Exactly. Whether all the safety data, whether this drug has already been submitted for approval in another indication, whether the safety data is available, and whether it's usable, whether you can transfer the findings from the safety studies that were done in this other area and this other indication to your patient population that you are looking at in your rare disease in that case.
Clear. Thank you. A question from Paul Brandt in the audience. What effect does the patent being out of patent, that status, have on the commercial model? Now, I think we're sort of aware what those challenges are. Sarko, anything to say to that?
Yeah, definitely. That's I would say, in addition to the previous comments on the regulators being ready or not for repurposed drugs, the lack of driver in repurposing is obviously a main issue, and it's very noteworthy for out-of-patent compounds. If there are multiple companies involved in a generic drug for a novel indication, then there's no real main driver from a commercial side, because the benefits sort of, if successfully repurposed, the royal route, so including a registration, etc., can in some cases be diminished by off-label use or by compounding or etc. So that severely hampers the royal route for registration, in my view, as well. So you end up with sort of academics trying to push to registration, which are commonly not very used to interacting with regulators at all, and regulators are commonly not very used to interacting with academics. Likewise, so there's a sort of misfit there. So yeah, that severely hampers repurposing is one of the major issues that we need to work on to establish, and it was mentioned earlier, to have some sort of solid business case for a different group of companies for out of patent to make a decent living with the final state, with stimulating and being engaged and drive the regulatory process to get a normal registered drug and have a normal business case there, without having this sort of value-based approach in a reimbursement sort of language, because most of the time we know the drug, and if paracetamol, if you put it in your ear and it remarkably cures cancer, the value is enormous, but we know how much it costs to produce it. So we need to balance this sort of pricing issue. We've been working on, for if it's very late stage, one of the solutions could be to use cost-based pricing models with a decent innovation bonus to stimulate this business case in late stage for generic companies to do the royal route. If not, then as a society we need to accommodate the fact that apparently for repurposing drugs we have a different regulatory world than for normal drugs, which seems to be odd. So we need to sort of work to bring the worlds together, I'd say.
Clear. So the points about reimbursement and creating an economic model out of that, we'll come back to that in a moment. Very interesting one. I think the generics industry call it value-added medicines, where they do a bit of tinkering to add value to it. So let's see how we can bring that also to the rare disease space. I'm going to hand over to Martin now. Martin, you've got some slides to share. One of those initiatives that was just funded, in fact, we're involved in directly as coordinators in that, and we want to share with you the aspirations here, and also it's a call to action. We'd love to be involved. We'd love to get to hear from you, your direct involvement in repurposing. We need to create a community that knows how to find each other and knows how to ask the right questions and ask the right people to answer those questions. So Martin, I'll hand over to you.
Yes, thank you. So this is hot off the press. In fact, we were informed on Monday only that we were invited to put this into work. So we responded to a call last year by the European Commission to put together a plan to create a sustainable platform for repurposing in Europe. Also addressing what was discussed, that academic and investigators are picking this up as a low threshold activity, but with all pitfalls to come. Also, the call for more rational design and rational drug repurposing approaches. Many activities are going on in the science field, but as an organization that EATRIS is in translational medicine, we do look at the clinical research and the non-clinical research. So depending on whether repurposing hypotheses come from clinical observations or from new approaches, technology platforms or in silico. And I think, as Aimo explained, that the technique is there, but what else? And you find out that you cannot do it alone anymore. So the mission and vision of Remedy for All is to create an ecosystem that facilitates a faster and cost-effective patient-centric development and implementation of repurposing medicine. So everything end-to-end value chain. And the mission is to establish a platform that covers this whole value chain, with also an emphasis on drug repurposing in a patient-centric way, and also demonstrating that the platform works with 4 ambitious projects. So there are 7 objectives. The first one focuses on the operational aspects, accessing the expertise and the tools, which will be, let's say, from preclinical and non-clinical and predictive models be combined in silico tools. As mentioned, demonstrator projects. We will do it with an outward vision, so networking. It will not be a closed consortium. It's really reaching out, working with the initiatives that are already making progress, and work on the best practice. And ultimately also where bottlenecks are there, to have a policy discussion, and ultimately with the aim to improve the policy environment. It was already mentioned in the chat that people might not have the knowledge or expertise. So training the next generation of researchers and all people involved. And also we're very ambitious, not only on the EU scale, but also connected globally, because the world is a small and a big place these days. This is the ambitious, well, let's say, map of the project. So there are two pillars. One is the platform itself, the bricks and the brains to support the drug repurposing projects. As said, it's a patient-centric approach with patient champions and assembly of repurposing teams, producing sound plans and optimal execution of projects. This will be tested in 4 demonstrator projects. We'll show them in the next slide. And this will interact with the community. There are a few boards that will implement and with an open vision discuss the policies, and this will be an interactive way. The demonstrator projects have been selected during the proposal preparation by an open call. We received about 35 projects, and these were selected on both on 2 main criteria. One, to cover the wide range from early discovery to late clinical activities, and the second also to cover the use of the technical components of the work plan. As you can see, it's covering also various disease areas, from COVID-19 to rare disease and oncology. The Stakeholder Forum is composed of all the stakeholders that we can think of, and we would love to hear your input also on the outline of this this framework and the interactions and any ideas moving forward. With a policy board where already connections have been made, let us know if key players are missing. And this is the work plan. So we have some transversal work packages where there will be a very much emphasis on engaging with the patient, a co-creation element, and then the operations and the planning. And as early as possible, considering the regulatory maze ahead of us. The training and capacity building will take the learnings from this exercise, which will be a 5-year project. Then the technical components are divided in the discovery phase, with covering the in silico tools, the in vitro tools, the development phase, also considering possible reformulation, reconsideration of patient population, and also the clinical development steps ahead. So it's very comprehensive and very ambitious, but it is what you need to do in drug repurposing. And then the practice. We know the stories that Finecure and Beacon today is talking about. Nick, one of the co-founders, it's an amazing story, but by today it's still facing challenges of the uptake and the reimbursement, also mentioned by Sako, for instance. So that also needs to be considered as soon as possible and at the appropriate moment in the project lifecycle. Finally, this is the list of partners. It's 24 partners. EATRIS is coordinating. There are obviously research institutes in the translational phase represented, but we have funders, we have Beacon, we have another infrastructure that's focusing on the clinical trial framework. So depending on the innovative and international character, we can also have some access to expertise there. And we have also SME on board and regulator, and not last but not least, HTA expertise. The final slide is about the global connection. We already have started partnering with organizations in the US, the NIH, NCATS, in India, Open Source Pharma Foundation, and in Brazil, Fiocruz. And we can team up together with them upon implementation of this exciting project. And that's it.
Super. Martin, thank you very much. And I think that all of today's discussion was sort of alluding to the fact that repurposing is still a little bit of the Wild West, quite fragmented. There's a lot of energy and a lot of effort going into it, but people are having to hack their way through the jungle of not knowing who to talk to or precisely the next steps each time. So there's another initiative funded like Remedy for All that will be involved in this. So there's now this concentration of effort and this policy attention. Hopefully we can meet a couple of years from now and some of these problems will be less acute. I think we're still going to have the issues around the reimbursement model and incentive models. And that's something I think for us, for the research community and the patient communities, to pressure policymakers to develop economic incentives. I see Sako has something to say. Please go ahead.
I'm just, I think, adding to the discussion that repurposing, we have to realize that it is a segmented field, and we're sort of from the patient perspective, the access example clearly shows that there's an area where there's not much development going on. It's just in use and it's off-label use, and we're doing this, and it's well established, but nobody cares to register it, and so it sort of hampers the continuous access for patients. So that's an area. And then there's an area with very high risk, with a total really different indication area that needs exploring and going back to the drawing board, and needs full development in Vastin in macular degeneration, which is intraocular instead of intestinal cancer. So it's different. It's a way different approach, and we need, in both examples, we need the commercial parties to be driving the process, rather than, I think, having a fully publicly funded route for repurposing. But we have to realize that apparently, for some reason, the companies are not doing this by themselves now. So there is something that incentivizes them to take it forward, to register it for a rare disease if it's well established, because there are multiple, it's off patent and there are multiple providers, or embark on the more exploratory route, because they're afraid for Avastin in the eye is only a fraction of what you put in intravenously. So I'm just saying there's different aspects to repurposing, and all routes need engagement from companies, and they can be different than your typical traditional pharmaceutical company. It could be a production access more driven company, or an exploratory, but then we need to again get a decent business case in place for repurposing and prevent hijacking, which we've seen also in the rare disease area, where academics repurpose a drug for a novel indication, and without adding any value, and strictly only registering the drug, multiplying the price by 100. So that is, so somewhere in between we need to figure out how to incentivize the right companies to take it forward, with the patient in the end being the sole client to this. For this, we need to provide access to patients.
Yeah, clear. Sako, I think that's a really good closing statement. We're coming to the end now, so I'm going to just try and summarize a little bit. So first, a big thank you to not only the panel members who gave us really useful words of wisdom from your experiences, but also a really great interactive session from all the audience. So from what I hear, the technical process is more or less, it's possible to repurpose, but where we get into trouble is when we actually start to look at the human factors. So the understanding of the regulatory needs is very specific to the actual product and context and access to the original data. And it's not taken as being said that the data package then is useful in the new context. So we have to be aware of that. The regulators are approachable, both nationally and the EMA, and they're working really hard to make themselves available. So bear that in mind. It needs to be patient-driven, but also at the same time having a very interdisciplinary approach to it, and having all the expertise around the table that can help you understand. And then the biggest issue we seem to come to is, how do we actually incentivize people to spend the huge amount of money it takes to repurpose a drug, maybe less than a novel drug, but it's still a lot of money, when the Financial incentives there are very unclear. So I think there probably, for me, my personal input would be that's really a big focus area for a group like this, especially the patients as the champions. So I think it's pressure in the next few years on finding financial incentives, pressuring the policymakers to look at that. We invite you from Remedy for All to make contact with the IATRIS. We want this kind of community involved in the repurposing process. We want to be able to talk about this in the right level and really across Europe. So do make contact with us. Thank you very much, Rick, and the organizing team for this great session, for helping us have the opportunity to chat here today. To Aimo, to Martin, to Sako, to Tony, and for all the great interventions from the audience. And wish you a very much enjoyable rest of conference.